All right, what's going on, everybody? We are back again for the third time this week. That might be a record on this here channel, even though, you know what I'm saying, my body's suffering for it. We back on the 10s unit. Had a terrible night last night, but we still about to get this content, hashtag content out. Today, a couple people have asked me to do this, so I'll do it. We're going to talk about D'Angelo Russell and his past playoff performances and the circumstances surrounding why he didn't play so great, and also going forward, whether or not those are indicators of some larger overall issue with him on the playoff stage or if it was just bad matchups and things like that. So, first we can start with the Nets series 2019, first time in the playoffs. That series was I don't think it was a series in which he was afraid of the moment necessarily. I just think that the way they guarded him in that series, if it was a playoff series, if it wasn't a playoff series, I don't think he would have had the best of times. During the course of the regular season, he got a couple good games off on them, but those games in particular, like he would be guarded by Jimmy Butler, like primarily in the first moments of the game and things like that. They didn't really deploy Ben Simmons on him too often in the games where he had great games. I think he had a 37-point game and things like that. He also had some stinkers in the regular season against him. I think he had like a 9-point game and things like that. But that series in particular was just like a really bad matchup for him. And what we know now is that like him as a number one option, there's some limitations as to the kind of things he can do for you in certain matchups and things like that. And the Sixers matchup was a particularly bad one for him. In terms of who they had guarding him initially and who was waiting in the paint. So a lot of the situations you would see is that he would have Ben Simmons or Jimmy Butler hounding him on the perimeter. It was a lot of Ben Simmons in the beginning of games, and then they would switch off to Jimmy Butler later in the games, and then they tried known irritants like TJ McConnell, and then he would see some James Ennis. He had relative success against those two after like game one. Once he figured out like what TJ and James were doing, he was getting a bucket anytime he wanted against them two people. But against Jimmy and Ben in particular, Ben was causing him a lot of problems timing wise, particularly coming off of screens, because he was getting physical at the point of the screen, and D'Lo would kind of get free because Jared Allen is a great screener. So he would get some space, and then the distance that Ben would cover on the back contest was causing him a lot of problems, like timing wise, because he was rushing shots and things like that. So he was missing a lot of shots in the mid range area. And then the times where he did get clean looks in the mid range area, he was kind of seeing ghosts for like the first couple games of the series, even though he had good games, like good moments in like each of these games, which we'll talk about later. But like you can tell that his timing was off. And then when he would get even freer and would have like a little deeper push into the paint, Joel Embiid would be waiting there, or they used Boban a lot in that series. So like him getting to the rim wasn't really a thing that he could do that great, like in general. Just he was a floaters guy as opposed to all the way to the rim guy. And so he would get past the initial defender, which was Ben or Jimmy, and then he would meet one of the largest human beings in the paint or one of the best shot blockers in the NBA in the paint, and he was just having a lot of inconsistent like finishing angles and like just ways to get the ball off. So you see him rushing a lot of shots in those areas, either on the mid range or in the like in the floater range and stuff like that. Also, the type of shots he took were different because he kind of tried to adjust to the way they were playing him with the back contest and things like that. So instead of straight up pull ups, it was a lot of left to right, like snaking type stuff, and like the pull ups were like dribble pull-ups going left or going right. Like he wasn't really shooting set shots in that way, and so those were falling short in some respects and things like that. But from like a pressure standpoint, it wasn't anything I saw outside of like the first couple shots of game one where he was like out of the flow of the game as like a shooter. After like some initial like strong shots and things like that, he had a lot of like good moments in that series. Like I mentioned, once Ben and Jimmy weren't in the picture, he was getting pretty much whatever he wanted in some of those games. He had like the only really like terrible game he had was game 5. Now he had bad halves in like each of the games, but he had moments in what was it, game 1? I think he scored 19 points in the first half of the second half in game 1. He had 19 in the second half. He had 16 points in the first half of game one. In game three, they were kind of trailing, like for a good majority of the game. But in the fourth quarter, they were in this there was there was this moment like in the fourth quarter where they were down like 9 or 7-ish, and he scored like 11 straight points to try to get them back in the game. The only problem was the other end, they just weren't stopping anybody. So he was scoring on one end, and then the Sixers would come back and they would do the same thing. So he had 3 like really good like scoring output like bursts like in a half or in a quarter, and then in game 4 he had some huge plays. In game 4 he had like 2 or 3 big threes. He had in the final 90 seconds he had a go-ahead 3, and then they didn't stop them again. Despite like the best efforts of the defense, they were playing hard and stuff like that, but sometimes bounces just don't go your way. That Mike Scott 3 was after a particularly like lively possession, which they almost got a steal and things like that, but he had the go-ahead 3. And then coming down the next time, he had the go-ahead assist to Joe Harris. And then in the final moments, he did have a chance to like try to win the game, but he tried to make the right play. He passed the ball to Jared Allen, who got fouled, by the way. And then he just the game ended how it ended. But they probably should have won that game specifically. But in the 5-game series, he had 4 games in which like he showed that the pressure necessarily wasn't an issue. It was more so the way that he was being guarded, and the way like that he was just being defended. It was just like matchups that aren't ideal for him as a basketball player. We had 2 of the best defenders like that we've seen in recent times on him at any given time, and then we had one of the best defensive bigs in the paint, and just one of the largest human beings ever created, like being the other like guy that would be waiting for him there. So not only did he not shoot well, like he didn't necessarily play make well, but I know that Joe Harris not playing well in playoffs is like a meme, but like before it happened, like with KD and with Kyrie and things like that, he had a really like not great series against the Sixers in 2019. I think he shot like, I can't remember it offhand, I might post it, but he was either in the teens or in the 20s from 3. He had a good like start of game 1, and then he didn't really make anything after that until like the end of the series pretty much. Damari Carroll had a bad series. Rodion Kurucs wasn't playing great when he got on the court. Travion Graham never really shot the 3 well the whole time he was there. So not only was he dealing with his own personal defensive issues with the way they were covering him, like his teammates outside of Karras and Dinwiddie, who kind of benefited from his gravity in some respects in that series, weren't really playing well. The ancillary guys weren't shooting well. Ed Davis was playing well, but he got hurt. Jared Dudley was the most reliable like shooter that he had there. So from like a pressure standpoint, or the fact that it's the playoffs, I don't think that series in particular, it was a problem in that respect more so than it was just a stylistic thing where he just couldn't overcome it due to what he was going up against. Even though he still had moments of brilliance in like each of the games except game 5. The whole team just was they got washed in game 5. They were getting cooked. So that's the Sixers series. For the Grizzlies series, that series also, it was more akin to what we saw on on Tuesday for the play-in game, where I think he was a little more amped up for the play-in game, so it was more of a nerves thing with his jumper and things like that. But for the Grizzlies series in particular, what was going on in that series is that he was just kind of getting taken out of the game. And that's not like he was getting the ball and passing it off and things like that. No, they were the context leading up to that series is that he was absolutely cooking the Grizzlies in the regular season. I think he averaged like 28 points per game against them in the 4 games they played. Like he was giving them the absolute blues in every game. I don't think he had a bad game against them in the regular season. But in the playoffs, like everybody made it kind of known that he was like the focal point of like trying to stop him from going off the way he could, like he had been during the course of the regular season. And so what they did was they employed like a lot of denial type stuff. Like Dylan Brooks was on him and things like that, and he made his life kind of difficult when he got the ball and things like that. But the hallmark of that series was more so him not being active. I know that people like to quote the shooting percentages and things like that, but he only shot over 12 shots a game, I think once, and it was game 3, which was, he had a very good game in game 3. We'll talk about that later. But it was more so a thing of inactivity as opposed to like him having the ball and absolutely like shitting his pants or something like that. People like to point to the shot in Game 5, but there's reasons why that happened the way it did and stuff like that. We could talk about that as well. But he just let them like kind of take him out the game, and he was kind of in this weird like position where he was kind of getting used to being the third guy. I think that he wasn't necessarily like all the way comfortable in that role the way that it had to be. And then during the course of the series, Pat Bev kind of they decided that they liked the matchup on Ja Morant a little bit more.
No. You went right at Ja on defense, and I'm just wondering, that's worked really well. Is that something, was a goal going in?
No, I took that upon myself.
I like that matchup.
Yeah, I like that matchup. I feel real confident there.
And so Pat Bev kind of became more involved in the offense as the series went along. And so we had a lot of possessions where D'Lo was just kind of spectating. He's either in the corner watching Pat try to drive against Ja Morant or whatever the case may be. And they I think they kind of knew that if you force D'Lo to the second side and he's on this team with guys who aren't necessarily ball movers, like Ant's not necessarily a ball mover. Cat can move the ball, but they're more ISO-oriented guys currently as they're, situated. So a lot of the times the ball just wouldn't come second side, and he's just out there, you know what I mean? And then when he did get the ball, Brooks was making his life difficult, but the thing he was having the most problem with was Jaren Jackson Jr. at the rim, which a lot of people do. But he got a lot of situations where he would break free like off of a back cut or something like that, and he would try to go lay the ball up. He was going up kind of, he wasn't going up the strongest, but he rarely does that anyway. But it was a lot of left hand finishes on the right side of the rim and stuff like that were getting blocked. Tillman gave him a couple problems because he was trying to finish left-handed up against on the right side of the rim and things like that. So he had some problems in that respect. Like just getting his offense going when he did actually get the ball. He shot well from three, which was like the thing that I was trying to see what his jumper was looking like and stuff like that. But he shot relatively well from the three-point line, and he also did a great job as a playmaker. I think like game 1 he had a good game playmaker and stuff like that. Game 5, he had a really good first quarter in game 5 where they were kind of down in the hole. They were down like 10-2 or something like that, and he was responsible for like a good 15 to 20 of the points as they were like coming back in that first quarter, and then they kind of took the lead as the game went along, and then we all know how game 5 ended. But game 3, he had a really great game in game 3. He was very instrumental in building both of those 20-point leads that they subsequently lost. When he went out of the game in game 3, they were up by 20-something points, and they lost the lead in like 3-4 minutes. And the same thing in game 5, where he wasn't really taking an active role in like the things that were going on the court as they were losing the lead. And it was kind of a weird situation in which like, yeah, you want him to be more aggressive for sure. But also like the things that they were doing were working for the most part. They had the whole thing of that series was they blew multiple like leads, right? So if you're in the position where he's not being as aggressive as you want him to be in certain respects, but it's also kind of working. Like it's kind of difficult to see, like how the balance could have really been shifted if he was a little more aggressive shooting wise, because like the results were what they were. Now maybe he could have prevented some of the leads from dissolving or whatever, but his play on the court as a basketball player was fine, even though he wasn't shooting great. I think he was second on the team in net rating to Jaden McDaniels. I think he was like top 4 or 5 in the playoffs in assists and like assist points created and things like that. So outside of the fact that he wasn't shooting the ball, one, well, but two, like he wasn't shooting at all. Like if he made like 5 or 6 more shots, he would have had like a 8 to 9 percentage point increase in his shooting. Like, so he just wasn't actively looking for his shots because they were game planning to take him out of the game off ball, and he wasn't getting the ball back as much as he should have. And when he did get the ball, he was more so a facilitator, and he was doing relatively well at that. So I don't know if it was a conscious decision to him to keep doing that. I don't know. Finch said that he didn't do a great job of like getting him more involved and stuff like that. So but game 6 was absolutely a bad game for him. Well, it was a bad decision-making game for him. He was he was throwing a lot of passes in that game that were like risky per se. Like he was throwing passes in the windows, and the Grizzlies were particularly aggressive in that game and playing the passing lanes and stuff like that. Like he had a bounce pass in transition that got stolen, and then like his last 3 plays were turnovers. Now I think 2 of them didn't really lead to anything, but like he had like 2 consecutive turnovers, and the one turnover, the last turnover of that series that ultimately got him benched, was funny because it was the same exact like pass that he threw to Joe Harris in Game 4 of 2019, and it you completed the pass. Like so, like decision making is what it is, but also like things just happen on the court that are just it just is what it is. But even though he got benched in like Game 6, he still like I think he had like the best net rating of that game on the team or something like that. Like he wasn't being actively harmful out there, and he wasn't like afraid of the moment or anything like that. He just had a bad outing, and he got took out for it. And when he got took out, nothing really improved for the Wolves. They didn't really do anything. They still had the same troubles that they had at the end of games because they weren't necessarily doing what they were supposed to do. But he had bad series. It was more so they were able to prevent him from doing anything in the series as opposed to him just like absolutely shitting the bed like as an active participant, which is on him more. He has to be a little more aggressive off ball and getting to the ball and stuff like that. But his overall floor game was fine. I don't think the moment was too big for him or anything like that. I don't think that's been the case in any of these games. I think he might have been a little too amped in Minnesota, but again, in the playing game. But again, he was playing a team that kind of knew everything about him at this point. Like they knew what made him uncomfortable, which spots of the floor he didn't like the ball and stuff like that. And even though that was happening, he still was playmaking at a good level, and he wasn't a super net negative on the court, even though he shared a lot of minutes with LeBron, and LeBron was his plus minus wasn't hitting like that. But overall, I think that he in his playoff outings outside of the Clippers playing game, who didn't have anybody to really guard him, and we saw what happened. He's just had some matchup dependent things that have kind of gone against him. I don't think it's necessarily a thing where it's going to be, the playoff lights are too bright for the guy. Like I don't think that's something that's going to be a problem. Even though he missed that shot in Game 5, he helped close out Game 4. He had a huge assist in the bucket and stuff like that. I don't think the moment was too big for him. I just think that the teams executed their game plan well against him, and he's not a guy who's going to force the issue, and he's probably not going to try to will himself to certain outcomes. And that's, you could say that's a problem or not, but it is what it is for those 2 series. Now I think that the Grizzlies series last year could be kind of informative to this one in terms of if they try to deny him the ball and things like that. But I do think that, one, he's playing with more capable passers around him, Reeves, LeBron, Schroeder to a lesser extent. I don't think AD is a better passer than Cat, but AD is less likely to short circuit. So I think we can have a more reliable offensive role for him in this series, playing off LeBron or AD or whoever is on the court with him, and get him a little more free off ball, because that was kind of a thing that didn't really happen as much as it should have in Minnesota. That's happened more often here. So I do think that, one, he's going to play better, and I think that it's not going to be I don't think we're going to see a continuation, but you never know. It could be him wanting to be in LA, and like he might put a little too much pressure on himself, and then we get similar results. But at the playoffs in and of itself, I don't think it's going to be a problem. It's whether or not the team that he's going up against can find ways to make his execution suffer, as opposed to just not meeting the moment. Of course, playoffs are not good for jump shooters and things like that, so we're going to have to see how that kind of pans out. But I think that this is a good spot for him as a third option on most nights, alongside 2 of the best playoff performers that we've ever seen in the NBA. I think that we're going to see a little bit better of an outing this time. And I do think that if he is who he is most of the time, I think the Lakers have a good chance to go really far in the playoffs. But other than that, I'm off of here. These last, I had a good 8 to 10 days, and I think that the things I was doing to free up my shoulders kind of damaged my lower back, so I got to reconvene with the physical therapist and see where we go from here. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to be here, but I am going to probably take it a little slower next week at least. I might do some lives or something like that, but you know what I'm saying? We had a good run. Hopefully this swelling in my back calms down and I could be back on here, you know what I'm saying, talking shooty hoops. But until then, I'm about to go rest my body after I edit this. And yeah, till next time.